Sophie? The coffee cup slipped from my hands, ceramic shattering against the concrete. 20 years collapsed in a single breath. 20 years of believing my father was dead, of carrying the weight of abandonment, of building a life around the hole he'd left behind. There he was, standing by the mailbox at 1274 West Elm, gray hair catching the afternoon light, wearing clothes I'd never seen but with the same slope to his shoulders that I'd inherited. The same green eyes that stared back at me from mirrors. My father. Alive. Living 2 doors down from me. How did you? His voice cracked, exactly the way mine did when I was overwhelmed. Oh my God, Sophie. You can't be here. It's not safe. Safe? My legs felt like water. The package in my hands, his package, addressed to Miguel Santos, filled with documents I couldn't understand and a note written in handwriting that had haunted my childhood memories, suddenly made terrible, impossible sense. Dad? The word scraped my throat raw. I hadn't said it out loud in 2 decades. What do you mean it's not safe? How long have you been living here? How long have you been watching me? His hands were shaking. Just like mine. Just like they always did when the world tilted sideways. 3 months, he whispered, looking around nervously. I've been trying to figure out how to approach you without. He stopped himself, fear flickering across his face. Meet me at Desert Coffee on Central in an hour. Come alone. That's when I knew. My father hadn't left us by choice. Something had torn him away from the life we'd built together. Something so dangerous he was still afraid of it 20 years later. And somehow, a misdelivered package had brought him back to me. The broken coffee cup lay between us like 20 years of silence, finally shattered. My life in Phoenix had settled into the kind of comfortable routine that felt both safe and slightly hollow. Every morning at 7:30, I'd pour coffee into my favorite mug, the blue ceramic one with a small chip on the handle that I couldn't bring myself to throw away, and step onto my front porch. Bailey, my 3-year-old golden retriever mix, would stretch beside me, tail thumping against the wooden planks as we watched the neighborhood wake up. I'd rescued Bailey from a shelter 2 years ago, drawn to him because he had the same cautious optimism I recognized in myself. We both knew what it felt like to be left behind, and we'd built something solid together. His unconditional love filled some of the spaces in my heart, but not all of them. At 32, I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant my days were spent in my converted spare bedroom, designing logos for small businesses and websites for people chasing their dreams. I was good at helping other people build their brands, their identities, their futures. My own felt perpetually under construction. My duplex on West Elm Street was small but mine, 1,200 square feet of carefully curated independence. I'd painted the walls soft gray and hung artwork from local Phoenix artists. Everything had its place. Everything was intentional. I'd learned early that if you could control your environment, you could control how much it hurt when things fell apart. Evenings usually meant takeout from Chen's kitchen, always the same order of orange chicken and fried rice, eaten while watching Netflix with Bailey curled against my leg. Weekends brought grocery shopping, laundry, and long walks through the neighborhood, where I'd wave to Mrs. Rodriguez next door and exchange pleasantries with other neighbors whose names I knew but whose stories remained safely at arm's length. I'd built this life deliberately after college, when I realized that dating meant eventually having conversations about family, and family conversations meant explaining why I didn't talk to my dad. He left when I was 12, I'd learned to say with practiced casualness, as if those 4 words didn't carry the weight of every birthday he'd missed, every graduation photo with an empty space beside me and Mom. Most relationships faded after that revelation. People either felt sorry for me, which I hated, or they tried to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I'd stopped trying to explain that it wasn't just his absence, it was the way he'd vanished completely, no forwarding address, no phone calls, no explanation. Like we'd meant so little that erasing us was easy. Bailey never asked about my past. He just knew that some nights I'd sit on the floor beside his bed, running my fingers through his fur while staring at nothing, carrying conversations with ghosts. He'd rest his head on my knee and wait until the moment passed. The only disruption to my carefully constructed peace was the occasional misdelivered package. Our street had confusing address numbers, and delivery drivers regularly mixed up 1247 with 1274. I'd become the unofficial package guardian for Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived alone and often missed deliveries. It gave me a small sense of purpose, being useful to someone who needed help. But even in my contentment, there were moments, usually late at night or early in the morning, when the world felt thin, where I'd catch myself listening for footsteps that never came, or saving funny stories to tell someone who wasn't there. 20 years later, I was still a daughter waiting for her father to come home. The UPS truck's engine rumbled outside at exactly 10:47 a.m. on that Tuesday in October. I know the exact time because I was on a video call with a client, discussing color palettes for their new restaurant logo, when Bailey erupted into his usual barking symphony. "Sorry, I need to grab this delivery," I told my client, muting my microphone as I padded to the front door in my slippers. The driver was young, maybe mid-20s, with sweat beading on his forehead despite the October weather. He balanced a small package against his hip while juggling his electronic tablet. "Package for 1274 West Elm," he announced, already extending the tablet toward me with that harried expression delivery drivers wear when they're running behind schedule. The package was surprisingly heavy for its size, about the dimensions of a hardcover novel but with the weight of something dense inside. Brown craft paper wrapping, multiple layers of clear packing tape wound around every edge like someone had been paranoid about it coming apart. No return address visible on the side facing me. I glanced at the shipping label, M. Santos, 1274, West Elm Street. My pen hovered over the tablet screen. Mrs. Rodriguez lived at 1274, but her first name was Maria, and her last name was definitely Rodriguez, not Santos. We'd exchanged mail before when packages got mixed up. "Actually, I think there might be an error." But the driver was already jogging back toward his truck, calling over his shoulder, "Just hold on to it, I'll figure it out." His truck door slammed, and he pulled away before I could explain the name discrepancy. I stood in my doorway, package in hand, feeling its unexpected weight. The tape job was excessive, almost obsessive. Whatever was inside had been wrapped by someone who really didn't want it to accidentally come open. Bailey sniffed around my ankles, curious about this new addition to our morning routine. I turned the package over, looking for any other identifying information, but there was just that typed label and layers upon layers of tape. Something about it felt important. Not just another misdelivered online shopping order or bills for a neighbor. The weight of it, the careful wrapping, the unfamiliar name, it all whispered that this package carried something significant. Something someone had been very careful to protect during its journey. I should probably walk it over to 1274 right now, I thought. But Mrs. Rodriguez's car wasn't in her driveway, and I'd never heard of anyone named Santos living in the neighborhood. By 6 p.m., I'd exhausted every reasonable option. Google searches for M. Santos 1274 West Elm returned nothing. The post office had no record of anyone by that name at the address. Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't home, and her mailbox confirmed what I already knew: she was Maria Rodriguez, not Santos. The package sat on my kitchen counter, taunting me. I'd circled it 3 times during the day, each time telling myself to just wait until Mrs. Rodriguez came home. But one corner had been damaged during shipping, and through the tear, I could glimpse what looked like manila folders inside. Maybe there's a phone number, I rationalized. A return address on the documents inside. Something to help me get this to its rightful owner. My hands shook slightly as I carefully peeled back the tape from the damaged corner, trying not to destroy the package completely. The brown paper gave way to reveal a thick manila folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents. I slid it out, noting how worn the edges were, like it had been handled many times. The folder was secured with a metal clasp, and paper clipped to the front was a handwritten note on lined notebook paper. The handwriting stopped my breath. Miguel, I hope these finally reach you. I've been trying to find you since 2015. I never stopped looking for her. I never stopped loving either of you. If you get this, please call me. There's so much I need to explain about why I had to leave. Dad. The note fluttered from my trembling fingers to the kitchen floor. That handwriting. God, that handwriting. I knew those careful cursive loops, the way the G in Miguel curved exactly like the G in good job, sweetheart that used to appear on my math homework. The distinctive way he wrote capital letters, slightly tilted to the right. The same signature that had been on every birthday card until I turned 12, every Christmas present until they stopped coming, every permission slip for school trips until Mom started forging his name. My father's handwriting. On a note dated 3 months ago. My legs gave out, and I sank into the kitchen chair, staring at the note on the floor like it might disappear if I looked away. 20 years of believing he was gone forever, and here was proof that he was not only alive but looking for someone. Looking for her. Who was Miguel? Who was her? And why was my father writing to someone who lived on my street? I picked up the note with shaking hands, reading it again. I never stopped loving either of you. Either of you. My mind raced. Mom and me? But why would he be writing to Miguel about us? And why couldn't he find us when we'd lived in the same city this entire time? The folder felt heavier now, weighted with possibilities I was afraid to explore. Inside could be answers to 20 years of questions I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself I didn't need them anymore. Why he left. Where he went. Whether he ever thought about the daughter he'd abandoned. But what if the answers were worse than the questions? What if I discovered he'd started a new family, forgotten about us completely? What if Miguel was a son he'd chosen to keep while leaving me behind? My hands hovered over the metal clasp. Opening this folder would change everything. I could feel it in my bones, the way you sense a storm coming before the first clouds appear. Whatever was inside these documents would shatter the careful life I'd built around his absence. But I had to know. 20 years of wondering had carved a hollow space in my chest, and maybe, just maybe, this folder held the pieces to fill it. I opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were photocopies of legal documents that made no sense, FBI letterhead, court stamps, references to witness protection programs. There were photographs of a young woman I didn't recognize, maybe in her 20s, with dark hair and kind eyes. And there were multiple copies of the same letter, all addressed to different M. Santos locations across Phoenix. My father had been sending the same package to multiple addresses, searching for someone named Miguel Santos. I spent Wednesday morning calling every M. Santos in the Phoenix directory. 17 numbers. 12 answered. Hi, I'm looking for Miguel Santos who might have lived at 1274 West Elm Street. Never heard of him. Wrong Santos, sorry. Miguel? No, you want my cousin in Tucson. Each dead end felt like a small betrayal. By noon, I was pacing my living room, Bailey watching me with concerned eyes. The documents scattered across my coffee table seemed to mock my efforts, FBI correspondence from 2003, something about protection of family members, references to a dependent minor child. That had to be me. But protected from what? Thursday, I drove to every address on my father's list. Apartment complexes, small houses, a trailer park on the south side. Most had different people living there now. One landlord remembered a Miguel Santos from 2015 but said he'd moved without leaving a forwarding address. Kept to himself, she said. Paid rent in cash, never caused trouble. Then one day, just gone. Friday morning, I broke down and hired a private investigator I found online. Janet Morrison had good reviews and promised discretion. I met her at a Starbucks on Camelback, sliding the folder across the small table. I need to find this Miguel Santos. And I need to know why my father is looking for him. Janet flipped through the documents, her expression growing more serious with each page. "Honey, these look like witness protection documents. See this stamp here? This kind of paperwork doesn't exist unless someone was in serious danger." "Danger from what?" "Usually organized crime. Drug cartels. People who hold grudges for decades." She looked up at me. "Your father witnessed something bad, didn't he?" My throat tightened. "He disappeared when I was 12. Just vanished. No goodbye, no explanation. My mom always said he abandoned us." "Men don't abandon their families to enter witness protection," Janet said gently. "They get forced into it. The question is, why is he looking for Miguel Santos now, 20 years later?" That afternoon, Janet called with partial results. "Miguel Santos isn't in any current database, but I found employment records. He worked construction in Phoenix from 2010 to 2015, then nothing. No social security activity, no tax records, no address changes. It's like he disappeared too." My chest felt tight. "What does that mean?" "Either he's dead, or he's hiding under a different identity. Just like your father probably was." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bedroom floor with the photographs spread around me, staring at the young woman's face. She looked familiar in a way that made my skin crawl, like déjà vu wrapped in anxiety. Who was she? Why did my father have her picture? And why did looking at her feel like staring into a mirror that showed someone else's reflection? Saturday morning brought a breakthrough that shattered everything I thought I understood. I was Googling combinations of Miguel Santos Phoenix 2003 when I found a newspaper archive. A construction worker named Miguel Santos had been questioned in connection with a murder at a Phoenix job site. The same job site where my father had worked. The article was brief, but it mentioned that Miguel Santos had been a witness to the crime. Just like my father. They'd been there together that night, two men who'd seen something they shouldn't have seen. My hands shook as I read the final paragraph. "Santos, who immigrated from Mexico in 1995, is survived by his daughter Sofia, age 12. Sofia. Not Miguel. The daughter. I was the daughter he'd been looking for." I read the newspaper article 5 times before the words penetrated the shock. Miguel Santos. Questioned as a witness. Construction site murder, 2003. Survived by his daughter Sofia, age 12. Sofia. Not Miguel. My birth name. The name I'd legally changed to Sophie when I turned 18, desperate to shed any connection to the father who'd abandoned me. Sofia Santos, the girl I'd buried under layers of new identity and careful reinvention. But that would mean Miguel Santos was my grandfather. I stumbled to my bathroom, legs unsteady, and pulled out the shoebox from under my bed. 20 years of kept secrets, birthday cards, Christmas presents, school notes. All signed Love, Dad. But buried beneath them was something I'd forgotten, my birth certificate. Sofia Santos. Born to Maria Elena Santos and David Michael Thompson. Santos. My mother's maiden name. The name she'd used before marrying my father, before becoming Maria Thompson, before reverting to Rodriguez after her second marriage. My grandfather had been Miguel Santos. The man my father was searching for was already dead, had been dead since 2003. The same year my father disappeared. I sank onto my bedroom floor, birth certificate trembling in my hands. The pieces were clicking together with devastating clarity. My father hadn't abandoned us. He'd been forced into witness protection after witnessing the same crime that killed my grandfather. But the FBI must not have told him that Miguel was already dead when they separated our family. For 20 years, my father had been living under an assumed identity, believing his father-in-law was alive somewhere, carrying the guilt of leaving his family behind. And he'd been searching for Miguel, trying to reconnect with the only family he thought might still accept him. The package wasn't meant for a neighbor. It was meant for my grandfather, sent to every address my father could find. But Miguel Santos had died before my father even disappeared, which meant I was the her he'd been looking for. Sofia Santos. The granddaughter of Miguel, the daughter he'd lost to witness protection. The girl who'd grown up believing her father was a coward when he was actually trying to protect her. My phone buzzed. A text from Janet, my private investigator, found something important. Miguel Santos lived at 1274 West Elm from 1998 to 2003. That address belonged to him. Mrs. Rodriguez's house. The house where my grandfather had lived until he died. The house my father was now sending packages to, hoping against hope that Miguel might still be there to forgive him. But Miguel was gone, and Mrs. Rodriguez had been living there for 15 years, probably never knowing the tragedy that had unfolded in those rooms before she moved in. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. Everything I'd believed about my childhood, my father's disappearance, my identity, all of it was built on a foundation of lies and misunderstandings. My father wasn't Miguel Santos. He was David Thompson, hiding under an assumed identity for 2 decades, sending packages to a dead man's address, living just 2 streets away from the daughter he thought he could never safely approach. The photograph in the folder, the young woman with kind eyes, that was my mother at 22, before heartbreak aged her, before she learned to stop waiting for a man who couldn't come home. Either of you. He'd been trying to find Miguel Santos to ask for forgiveness, to explain why he'd had to disappear, to get permission to contact his daughter and wife. But Miguel had been dead for 20 years, taking those answers to his grave. The doorbell rang. I sat on my bedroom floor for 3 hours, surrounded by the scattered pieces of my shattered childhood narrative, staring at my phone. My father was alive. He'd been living 2 miles away for 4 years, close enough that we probably shopped at the same grocery store, walked past each other in parking lots, existed in the same small world without knowing it. But knowing he was alive and deciding to contact him were 2 completely different kinds of courage. What if he didn't want to see me? 20 years was a long time to build a new life, maybe with a new family. What if approaching him put him in danger, or put me in danger? The witness protection documents had mentioned ongoing threats, people who hold grudges for decades. I picked up my phone 6 times and put it down 6 times. What would I even say? Hi Dad, it's Sophia, the daughter you abandoned, except you didn't abandon me, you saved me, and I've hated you for 20 years for being a hero I never understood. My hands trembled as I scrolled through my contacts. I didn't even have his number. How do you find someone who's been professionally erased from existence? But Janet had found an address. 1274, West Elm Street, Mrs. Rodriguez's house. My father was living in my grandfather's old house, probably thinking he was honoring Miguel's memory, not knowing that Miguel had been dead since 2003. The irony was suffocating. He'd been trying to ask a dead man for permission to contact his living daughter who was standing right outside, taking in packages meant for a ghost. Bailey patted over and rested his head on my knee, sensing my distress. I scratched behind his ears, trying to steady my breathing. What if he looks at me and sees all the ways I've failed him? I whispered to Bailey. What if I'm not the daughter he remembered? What if too much has changed? 20 years of birthdays he'd missed. Graduations he hadn't attended. The wedding that never happened because I'd learned not to trust men who made promises. The grandchildren he'd never met because I'd never had them. A career he knew nothing about, friends whose names would be foreign to him, a whole life built in his absence. But then I remembered the photographs in the folder, shots of me at college graduation, walking Bailey, sitting on my front porch. Distant, blurry, taken with a telephoto lens, but they proved he'd been watching. He'd been present for my life in the only way he could safely manage. That had to mean something. That had to mean he still cared about the daughter he'd lost. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom, thinking of you today, sweetheart. Hope you're having a good weekend. Mom. Who'd spent 2 decades believing she'd married a man who could abandon his family without a second thought. Who'd cried herself to sleep for months after he disappeared. Who'd learned to be both parents, who'd sacrificed her own happiness trying to fill the hole he'd left behind. She deserved to know the truth. They both deserved to know that love hadn't failed them, circumstances had. I stood up, legs shaky but determined. Whatever happened next, I couldn't live with the regret of not trying. I couldn't spend the rest of my life wondering what if, carrying the weight of a reunion that never happened. 20 years of silence was enough. I walked to 1274 West Elm at sunset, the package clutched against my chest like armor. My legs felt disconnected from my body, each step requiring conscious effort. When I reached Mrs. Rodriguez's house, I saw him. A man in his 60s, gray-haired and careful, checking the mailbox with the same precise movements I remembered from childhood. The same way he used to sort through bills at our kitchen table, organizing everything into neat piles. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Miguel Santos?" He turned, and 20 years collapsed. His face was older, lined with worry and loneliness, but his eyes, as God, his eyes were exactly the same. Green like mine, with the same crinkle at the corners when he was thinking. "Sophie?" The word broke from his lips like a prayer. "Oh my God, Sophie. Dad." I couldn't manage anything else. The package slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the sidewalk with a dull thud. He took a step toward me, then stopped, hands reaching out and pulling back, like he was afraid I might disappear. "You can't be here. It's not safe for you to." "The witness protection case closed 3 months ago," I interrupted, surprised by my own steadiness. "The FBI cleared you. I know about Grandpa Miguel. I know about the construction site. I know why you left." His face crumpled. "You know? How could you possibly? You sent a package to your own house. Wrong address." I've been trying to find Miguel Santos for a week, not knowing he was already dead. Not knowing he was my grandfather. Not knowing you were David Thompson hiding in plain sight. He sank onto Mrs. Rodriguez's front steps, covering his face with his hands. "Miguel died the same night I witnessed the murder. I never got to tell him I was sorry for bringing danger to his family. Never got to explain why I had to disappear from Sophia's life." "Sophia changed her name to Sophie when she turned 18, I said, sitting beside him on the steps. "She wanted to forget the father who abandoned her." "Except he didn't abandon her, did he?" "Every single day." His voice was muffled by his palms. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I drove past your school and saw you getting older without me. I wanted to run to you so badly it felt like dying." "Then why didn't you?" He lifted his head, and I saw tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Because they told me contact would put you in danger. Because I loved you too much to risk your safety for my own selfish need to hold my daughter." I reached for his hand, weathered and calloused but warm, so warm. "The danger's over, Dad. You can hold your daughter now." He pulled me against him then, and I was 12 years old again, breathing in the smell of sawdust and aftershave that meant safety, that meant home. We both cried, 20 years of grief and relief and love that had never died, just been buried under layers of necessity and protection. "I'm sorry," he whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry I missed everything. I'm sorry you grew up thinking I didn't want you. I kept all your birthday cards," I admitted. "Even after I hated you, I couldn't throw them away." "I have a photo of you at college graduation," he said. "Taken from behind a tree with a telephoto lens. You wore a blue dress. You were there?" "I was at everything I could safely attend. Always watching, always proud, always loving you from whatever distance I could manage." We sat on those steps until the stars came out, filling 20 years of silence with words that should have been spoken decades ago. 6 months later, I can tell you that miracles don't always look like lightning bolts or burning bushes. Sometimes they look like a misdelivered package on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in too much tape, addressed to a dead man who turns out to be your grandfather. That broken part of me that I'd carried for 20 years, the part that whispered I wasn't worth staying for, that fathers leave daughters without looking back, that love is conditional and fragile, it's quiet now. Not gone completely, but healing in ways I didn't think were possible at 32. My morning routine hasn't changed much. I still drink coffee on my front porch at 7:30, still work from my converted spare bedroom, still order takeout from Chen's Kitchen on Fridays. But now there's a chair beside mine on the porch, and sometimes it's occupied by a man with gray hair who tells me stories about the little girl I used to be. Dad remembers things I'd forgotten, how I used to collect smooth rocks from construction sites, how I'd insist on wearing my princess dress to grocery stores, how I'd fall asleep in his lap while he watched evening news. Having those memories returned to me feels like finding photographs I thought were lost in a fire. We have dinner every Sunday now. He brings flowers from the hardware store where he works, always daisies, because he remembers they were my favorite when I was 8. I cook badly, and he pretends my lasagna doesn't taste like cardboard. Bailey has claimed him completely, following him around my house like he's afraid Dad might disappear again. The hardest conversation was with Mom. She cried for 3 hours when I told her the truth, not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come when you realize the man you loved hadn't betrayed you after all. She's been writing him letters, and he's been writing back. They're not trying to rebuild what they had, but they're building something new. Friendship, maybe. Forgiveness, definitely. I sleep better now. Those nights when I used to sit on the floor beside Bailey's bed, carrying conversations with ghosts, they don't happen anymore. The ghost became real, became present, became a father who never stopped loving his daughter. People ask me how I knew to trust him after so many years. How I knew he wasn't just making excuses, spinning stories to ease his own guilt. But when someone has been taking photographs of your life from behind trees for 4 years, showing up to your graduation ceremony in disguise, living 2 miles away just to be close to the daughter he couldn't safely approach, that's not guilt. That's love. That's the kind of love that endures 20 years of separation and silence. The most surprising thing is how it's changed my capacity for trust in other areas. I'm dating someone now, a kind man named James who works at the local library. When he tells me he'll call, I believe him. When he makes plans, I don't brace for disappointment. Learning that my father's absence was protection, not abandonment, rewired something fundamental in my understanding of love. Sometimes I think about all the small miracles that had to align for that package to end up in my hands. The similar addresses, the rushed delivery driver, my curiosity overcoming caution. But mostly, I think about how 20 years of pain can be healed by one afternoon of truth. Dad still lives at 1274 West Elm. I'm still at 1247. The distance between us has never been shorter. That morning, I thought I was just signing for a stranger's delivery. I didn't know it would bring my father back into my life after 20 years of silence. 20 years of believing he'd abandoned us because we weren't enough. 20 years of carrying the weight of a goodbye that was never meant to be final. But now, sitting on my front porch with that same chipped coffee mug, watching Dad teach Bailey to fetch the morning newspaper, I understand something profound about the nature of miracles. They don't always announce themselves with trumpets and bright lights. Sometimes they arrive disguised as mistakes, wrong addresses, misdelivered packages, delivery drivers running late. The package sits on my mantel now, beside a photograph of Dad and me from last Christmas. Inside that torn brown wrapper wasn't just old documents and faded photographs. It held 20 years of love that had never stopped, protection that had never wavered, and a father who had been watching over his daughter from whatever distance safety would allow. When the UPS truck pulls up now, Bailey still barks, but I don't feel that familiar flutter of anxiety about unexpected deliveries. Instead, I think about how the wrong address turned out to be exactly the right one. How a package meant for a dead man found its way to his living granddaughter. How 20 years of separation ended with a recognition that felt like coming home. Dad waves from Mrs. Rodriguez's yard, his yard now, and I wave back from mine. 2 houses apart, but closer than we've ever been. Sometimes the most important deliveries are the ones that were never supposed to reach us at all. Sometimes getting lost is just another way of finding your way home. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the thing you've been waiting for your whole life shows up on your doorstep wrapped in brown paper, addressed to someone you've never heard of, carrying everything you thought you'd lost forever. That's how miracles work. Quietly. Persistently. One misdelivered package at a time.